Okay, round 2 of attempting to record the podcast because this app is aggravating sometimes and you can't pause it for a second and walk away. My name's Justin Perkins. This is Talk Junkie. Who's your hero? I mean, like, we have different types of heroes. We have the theatrical type hero, heroes from movies and fiction and things of that nature. We have real life heroes. Family members. I don't include any type of celebrity, president, anything of that nature into a real life hero. They're still fictitious to a certain degree because they have a public persona, and that public persona for everyone is somewhat manipulated, but for people that make their living in the public eye, it's heavily manipulated. See, I grew up in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. Our heroes were a specific type of hero. Other types existed at that time, but for the most part, it was the stereotypical good guy. Anything that they done, or any activity that they were engaged in that could be in any way considered negative or bad, was the result of something done to them and them having to do that bad thing in the name of good or in the name of self-preservation. i.e. Rambo or Braddock or any number of action stars. The intention was for them to be purely good, for them to be the actual good guy, to be the actual good person. Now, as I got older and went into the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a shift there. And I know that this isn't a revolutionary thing. This had happened before. Bronson in what's the movie? I'm having a blank. But Charles Bronson played a very bad good guy. A very anti-hero in Death Wish. Dirty Harry was an anti-hero in a lot of ways. Like, the anti-hero, especially in literature, but to me, literature is viewed through a different lens. Literature is viewed in snidbits, kind of here and there, because you don't get a large swath sometimes of literature from one exact close decade of time, whereas with other forms of entertainment, you'll get that. And it's easy to reflect a lot of times on things of that nature with more modern things. But this anti-hero had existed before. But it became very, very prevalent in the late 90s, in my opinion, completely due to professional wrestling. Stone Cold Steve Austin. In wrestling, there's heels and there's baby faces. Baby faces are good guys, heels are bad guys. And for all intents and purposes, Stone Cold should have been a heel. But in actuality, he was a babyface. And it somewhat perplexed McMahon, from what I've read. And I think it's because he'd never seen anything like that before. Ric Flair did something very similar, and that was when in the 80s as a horseman. I don't watch wrestling anymore, but I did as a kid. It just kind of lost my interest because I think the story went away from it. But as a kid, as a young kid, I hated Ric Flair. Then I slowly grew to love him, and he's my favorite wrestler of all time. Flair had the ability to make some people love him even as a heel. Obviously there's always going to be people who like the heel, but Flair had an attraction to him that was a little hard for some people to explain. Stone Cold did this on a massive level in the late 90s. And it went from there to The Rock, who again, just massive. So you made this shift from the say your prayers, take your vitamins, Hulk Hogan, pure white meat baby face, to this anti-hero. And that transition was significant in cultural aspects as well, because people, even though maybe a lot of people internally were drawn to more of an anti-hero, especially people exposed to it, people exposed to Wolverine in comic books or Deadpool before the movies, they felt a draw to that already, and now it's somewhat socially acceptable. And you look post that, you have Logan, Wolverine from the Logan movie. You have Deadpool. You have this anti-hero. But in real life, what does that give you? See, you take my favorite to look at as presidents. Everyone seems to idolize them. They're all bad guys, and for the most part, they've all done horrible, horrible things. In some regard, even if it's not physical, they've been party too. But people like to idolize, and to me, these are fictitious people, just like it, because they're very fake about who they are. You know, to love Reagan for his commitment to the American way, and his honesty, and his transparency, and his wholesomeness, and his values. And then you have Iran-Contra. You know, you have all these things that, when you look at as a whole, well, who did I really idolize? Because, see, you only see the public persona. That's why I still look at them as fictitious people. John Fitzgerald Kennedy. You know, beautiful speeches, beautiful thoughts, a beautiful ability to speak and unite people. The Bay of Pigs. The countless sexual encounters while married. So many issues that at that time you didn't see as a public official. And that continues on today more amplified than any other time in history. But we see it with musicians. You see often with rock musicians, you see only the negative side. But behind closed doors, they're actually doing good things, and they're not really the rock star that they're pretending to be on stage. Whereas with pop stars, you get the goody two-shoes, everything's wonderful, you know, and then behind closed doors, it's not. One of the best examples with a famous person to me is Bill Cosby, idolized by so many clean comedians and so many people for his family values and all these things, and he's a monster. I mean, an absolute monster. But he was a lot of people's heroes. A lot of people's. So, there's those fictitious heroes. Politicians, actors, movie characters. They're all fictitious because you only see the part of the character they're putting out for you. And the thing about real life heroes is that may happen. You may mostly see the good in real life heroes, but you're much more likely to see the faults, and you're much more often going to have the opportunity to experience the faults, the bad sides of a character, of a person. See, for some reason, heroes are extremely, extremely important to us. They help to motivate us, they help to mold us, they give us something to chase often, and often they give us a sense of calm and a sense of reassurance for whatever reason. My mother was always a hero of mine because of her desire to work hard, her desire to do for her kids financially, and even though we weren't rich, to work extra to take care of us, even when she was tired, even when she was sick. And so that's influenced me. When this past winter, I had pneumonia. And anybody that knows me personally knows I work outside I do environmental and safety inspection and things of that nature for a natural gas company. I'm outside. A lot of times it involves walking, but it always involves outside and being I had pneumonia and was extremely sick. Was on breathing treatments and things of that nature. I missed one day's work. I'd worked the day before that and walked until I coughed and puked and just could not physically go to work the next day, and they asked me to stay home. I got that drive from my mother that I can work through this, I can do this. You know, there's things about my father that I've always really looked up to. My grandfather, though, is probably one of the biggest influences on my life. And I would consider him my hero. My grandfather on my mother's side. Unfortunately, my grandfather on my dad's side was gone before I was old enough to really remember a lot about him. And from everything I have heard, I feel like I would be saying the same thing about him here today if I had had the experiences with him that I had with my grandfather on my mother's side. See, the thing about heroes is quite often other people idolize them, other people look up to them. I don't know if anybody ever idolized my grandfather besides me and my mother. And probably my uncle. I know my mother, 100%. But it didn't matter to me. But being that he was a real person, I seen all of the good in him, and I could sit and name all the things about him that I idolized, that I respected, that I tried to mold myself in that manner. But I also seen all the bad. And it was in equal parts. And that bad didn't negatively affect the way I viewed the good. It put the good in perspective. See, a real hero, if we have real heroes, I mean, what is a hero exactly? What's the, we've discussed the value in it, how it makes us feel, but what does it have to do to determine to be a hero? It's not like the movies. It's not about good and bad. It's not about anything except for that person's impact on us. So, being a hero is an option for anyone. It's possible for anyone to be someone's hero. Sometimes it can be extremely in a negative fashion, sometimes in a good fashion. But in real life, a lot of times we get caught up on this hero deal, and we put too much value on the fictitious people. I know young girls who idolize the Kardashians. They're fictitious people. You're not seeing who they really are. You're not seeing what they really are. You're seeing what they put out publicly. And what they put out publicly is an ugly, ugly, ugly show. An ugly show of human debauchery. But you watch it and love it and idolize it. And I don't understand it. Now, if you look at what Kim Kardashian does with falsely incriminated people and trying to help get them out of jail, that's something to idolize. That's something to respect. That's something to look up to. But unfortunately, that's not what people are seeing. It's not what they're putting value on. So she sells and panders, which is no excuse. There's, I'm not taking up for her. That's not something you should do. But that's what she does. She sells and panders to this lower common denominator to be the hero they want, which is a valueless thing. But real life heroes can have a much more profound effect if we allow them to have faults. Because I hear that so often. People will defend these false heroes, these characters, these presidents, these actors and actresses, these movie stars, these musicians, these characters in movies, actually. They'll defend characters in movies. They'll defend the negatives in these people But they'll allow the negatives in real life people to cause them to completely write those people off. People who they have respected and admired. But there's value in those faults. Because quite often, if you really idolize somebody, you really respect somebody, regardless, in all walks of life, let's say this. There's only two options for most people when they encounter another person and that person's negative traits. They either do not have those negative traits, maybe because they experienced those negative traits from that person, and dislike the person because of those negative traits. Or they have the same negative traits and justify that person's negative traits, or have the same negative traits and dislike that person out of a dislike for themselves. As I look at it like this, anybody I've ever looked up to has negative traits. I have negative traits. I have negative things about me, tons of negative things about me. Everyone does. There's value in that negative if I put the right emphasis on it. That is not to amplify it or make it worse, but to observe it, recognize it, and alter it. But with someone else's negatives, I need to observe it, recognize it, apply it to what I don't want to do, and also consider what in their life got them to that negative. But I don't wash that person away based on the negative. That's to say, if a person says the wrong thing once and I know that that's not indicative of who they really are, I don't write that person off because of that. That's to say, if a person acts in a bad manner one time, I don't write that person off. I look at why. What's the cause of the action, or the reaction, if it were. See, you look at things so differently and so judgmentally when you're looking at a real person as compared to looking at a fictitious person or a character. The real person deserves more leeway than a fictitious person, than somebody putting on. We all put on a persona of some degree. But most of the time, if you're hanging out with real people in real life, you meet real people. I just met a friend today to drop something off. A friend named David. An amazing person. Genuine, real. I have a lot of respect for him. One of the most intelligent human beings I've ever met in my life. But also a very caring and sweet person. That's who he really is. That's who he comes across as, and that's who he really is. Most people are good, but everyone has faults. And our idols have faults. Our heroes have faults. My grandfather had faults. My grandfather married a hateful woman and allowed her to negatively influence his family. And I still have a lot of admiration for my grandfather. She was very destructive in my family's life, especially after he died. Now, he warned me about her before he passed away. But he should have done something earlier on in life. But we had talked about it many times. And the reason he didn't is because people of his generation didn't get divorces. He told me that numerous times. It's too easy to quit. And people of his generation didn't do that. Now, he allowed somebody to negatively impact his family. In all honesty, yes, he sheltered me almost completely from that. I didn't really have to deal with it. But people I care about, people he cared about, were very much negatively affected by this person. That's a negative on his part. He didn't do, in my opinion, what he should have done in regards to what's best for his family. I don't write him off for that. I don't dislike him for that. I don't walk away from him for that. There's no great travesty in that. He's not done any great injustice in that. Not to me. Now, there's other family members that I could see if they did that, but they didn't. They didn't walk away from him because his greater value lied in who he really was as a whole, not in that one singular issue. So, I looked at the situation he was in. I looked at the negative. I looked at the bad and said, okay, this is why this negative exists. This is how it got here. This is why it's been allowed to persist. Let me speak my piece on it and go on. But I still admire him for the great things he does. He was a very, very giving man. And since he passed away, I've been told that many times. A lot of people had food to eat, money for gas, money for necessities that they needed because of my grandfather. Because he would loan money, because he would give them food. And he did so much good for his community. And I didn't realize that or acknowledge it as much when he was alive, because it was so prevalent that I just looked at it as the way he was. He gave myself and his other grandkids so many opportunities that other young people didn't get when I was younger. And whether we took advantage of them or not was completely on us. But he gave them to us. He didn't have the ability to give his kids those opportunities, and he allowed someone to restrict a lot of the opportunities his kids had. But that's a negative and a positive and where they weigh on each other. He valued all people. He truly did. Regardless of who they were, where they were from, race, color, anything. He also understood something that it took me a long time to understand. When I was probably in 5th grade, 6th grade, my house had burnt down. And we moved into an apartment that my grandfather owned in a building. I'd been in that apartment before. And the whole time we lived there, I had some of the greatest peace I'd ever had in my life, being in that apartment. We only lived there for about a year and we moved out. And I'll explain to you why. When I was much younger, my grandfather had opened a furniture store in that same building. And there was one apartment, the apartment that we lived in that building. Everything else was the furniture store at that time. No one lived there. My grandfather had a hardware store right next to his house for years and years, since '82. And this furniture store was not much further, it was further away. It was more than a walk for him. He had to drive it. I would ride it on my bicycle all the time, come over early in the morning, and, one night I decided I want to stay all night over there. And he's up at the store early every morning anyway, and probably didn't want to be home, so he said, okay, we'll stay. Went and rented 2 Superman movies, the original Christopher Reeves. We rented the first, and I don't remember what the second was, and I rented Supergirl, the original 80s Supergirl movie. We stayed over there that night, and we watched those movies. And I don't think either one of us even made it into the start of the second one. We made it through the first one, and fell asleep. And I remember thinking at that time, maybe I want to be Superman. Maybe I want to be Superman. And the next morning, me and my grandfather talked. And I was little, and I was aggravating him to death. And I was like, I want to be like Superman. I want to be able to stop these bullets and do all these things. I was like, I want to be able to do good for people. I was like, and I want to be able to stop bad guys and things like that. And my grandpa said, he'd never been attacked by aliens like Superman had, and he'd never been attacked by all them bad guys. The only thing he'd ever had any problem with his whole life was bad people. And Superman didn't do much with just bad people, because they wasn't always committing a crime. They was just bad people. And if I just be good to people like I was good to him, and like he was good to me, that's kind of like being Superman in the real world. It's not word for word what he said, because my little head was trying to process it, and I think back and it's hard to remember word for word what he said. The only part I remember for sure is that at some point in it, word for word, he said, "I've never been attacked by no aliens." Yes, that's a double negative. And I've never seen a Superman that could fly. Every Superman I ever seen had to do things with his mouth and his head. So I want to be a hero. I think everybody did growing up. Everybody has the ability to be a hero, whether it be a hero or an anti-hero, whatever it is. Everybody wants to be Superman. We don't need Superman. There's some Lex Luthors out there, but they don't have superpowers, and we're not at the point to where we have to fight any advanced alien race yet. I think once they come here and see the way we treat each other, and they see all the trash that idiots and local parks and stuff throw out, they'll probably just eradicate us. They'll look at us as a disease. They'll look at us as a virus and eradicate us, because we won't have time to express to them what we really are inside. And that's what the world needs. That's the kind of superhero that the world needs. It needs the kind that does good from the inside out. So I still want to be Superman. But I just want to be the Superman that my grandpa was trying to explain to me, because he was that Superman for me. There's a lot of people tell you a lot of bad things about my grandpa, and a lot of them may be true. But there's twice as many people that tell you twice as many good things about my grandfather. And they're all true. And it's like that with your heroes too. Look at their faults. Recognize their faults. Identify their faults. See where those faults come from. And if those faults are so bad that they're drugging and raping people like Bill Cosby, well, the bad can often outweigh the good. But a lot of times you'll just see simple human faults. And you'll even find those faults in yourself. Or you'll find that you don't suffer from those faults. That you don't have those issues. And it very well may be because you were exposed to their faults. Let's go out. Do good. Look at your heroes. Don't judge them. Sympathize with them. Recognize who and what they are. You don't have to have a hero. You may be a hero. You may be somebody's Superman. But be the Superman that we need. The Superman that does real things for real people. And not the guy in blue tights and red underwear that tries to fly. Because that'd be weird.